of the docudrama The Social Dilemma. That will be Thursday of this week, the 18th. If you want to view the documentary with us, the viewing party starts at 5:30, and then the discussion will be at 7 on Zoom. So you can do both or just the discussion if you've already seen the documentary somewhere else. If you're not familiar with this documentary, it's about the rise of social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, their contribution to social media addiction, their influence on politics and conspiracy theories, a timely topic, and their impact on mental health issues and rising suicides among adolescents. So, very important documentary that we hope you will join us for discussing. If you're interested, please email Hannah. Um, she is the co-chair of the Social Justice Committee, and her Hannah Reynolds is her name, and her email, I'll put it in the chat, but her email is hannah@authenticity.studio, and she can send you the links for the viewing party and or the discussion. So I am delighted to welcome Dr. Roberto Abreu to be with us today. He's there with the Florida thing in the background of his little window. Roberto is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Florida. Prior to that, he was an assistant professor at Tennessee State University in the counseling psychology program there. He earned his master's degree in counselor education, clinical mental health track from Florida International University and completed his PhD at the University of Kentucky and did an APA accredited pre-doctoral internship at the Federal Medical Center in Lexington. That's part of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. As you will see in his presentation, Roberto's research and teaching approaches are heavily influenced by his interactions within the queer, Latinx, Black, and other people of color communities. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Roberto Abreu. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I just have to live up to all those things. So, all right. So it's great to see you and meet you all, even if it is through this new normal virtual world. I know that we only have an hour, so let me start sharing my PowerPoint so we can get started. All right. All right. So just a few things before we get started. Oh, quick question. There are some folks joining in. Should I just let them in, Linda? Or
I got them.
okay, cool.
Thank you.
So just a few things before we get started. Like I said, I know we only have an hour, so this is just like kind of like an intro, not even scratching the surface, or more deeper, areas to go into. Also, I hope that this also will be like somewhat interactive. So I know we can use, I know that it was just said to use that chat for questions and write your name on it. There might be some questions here and there that I post for you. So feel free to put your responses in the chat as well to some of that, some questions for reflection that I have in the PowerPoint here for you. So yeah, and feel free to disclose as you do those reflection questions as much or as little as you would like. Alrighty, so the name of my presentation is, it is Navigating Relational Issues and Building Alliance with LGBTQ Clients. Again, my name is Roberto Abreu. Let me go back. I'm in counseling and psychology area in the Department of Psychology at the University of Florida. And this right here that you see, this is the name of my lab. which is collective healing and empowering voices through research and engagement, or chévere for short. And chévere is a Spanish word that signified, it's like a positive way of relating to somebody or describing somebody. Or so a lot of my work, it relies on like strength-based approaches to looking at LGBT folks, and specifically LGBT folks of color. So some of the goals of the presentation is, identify to at least the reasons why LGBT terminology is important, reasons why approaching LGBTQ issues from an intersectionality approach is important, and we're gonna dive into intersectionality in the presentation as well. And some culturally appropriate interventions for working with LGBT clients, right? Especially those clients who hold more intersectional and marginalized identities, or multiple marginalized identities. Let me see. So I guess the first, first question I have for you, and again, feel free to put in the chat keywords or whatever, are, I guess you can unmute yourself and also say it. I don't know, I like the interactive piece, so you feel free to just unmute yourself and say it as well. So what comes to mind when you hear the word or the acronym LGBTQ? I realize that some of you might be in different areas of knowing of this topic or not. So I'm just wondering what comes to mind for you when you hear the word or the acronym LGBTQ. So I hear like community and family, yes. What else? What else comes to mind? Queer folks, yeah. Diversity, yep. Pride, all right. Cool. Yeah, so need for equity, yep, yes, all of those. And so LGBT, of course, it is an acronym, and there's multiple definitions of LGBTQ. Different scholars define it very differently. Some people would like to do away, from the acronym itself and just move toward using the word queer to be more encompassing. There's many communities of color who actually don't even use the acronym LGBTQ. They use more like woman loving woman, or other terms that are not as associated with LGBTQ, for the reason they perceive it to be more of a white perspective of gender and sexual diversity. But like broadly speaking, all right, so LGBTQ, as you can see here, it's meant to encompass a whole bunch of diverse sexualities and genders, right? Folks often refer to the Q as queer. Some people use it as questioning as well. And it's an umbrella term under which live a whole bunch of other identities, right? This is helpful because, like I was saying, lesbian, gay, and bisexual people are not the only marginalized folks when we think of sexual and gender diverse individuals. So the Q provides a little bit or some wiggle room, more expansive way of looking at the whole community. And of course, transgender folks is not the only gender identity. There are folks who identify as agender. So yes, so this is a big umbrella term, and it also want to say that there's many variations of definitions. All right, so I don't know how many of you are familiar with this picture over here, or the genderbread person. It looks like a gingerbread, right? And this is from a website called the website's called is spelled metrosexual, and I can put in the chat as well, or toward the end I can share this resource with you. So essentially what you are looking here, right, it is this person, right? It is this person. And some key terms to be aware of is like, so a lot of folks, even within the LGBT research community or just the LGBT community, kind of get sex and gender identity confused, right? So sex is more of a medical term, like your chromosome, like XY or XX, right? Gender identity refer more to the how the person sees themselves, sees their gender, and also how they express that gender. So if we look here, our gender person identity, how you see yourself, right? It is in your head, like how you see yourself, right? Attraction will refer more to like who you love, so to speak, right? Um, or you're just attracted to the person sexually, emotionally. Sex, really much like this definition here is referring to, is pertaining to medical terms, right? This is biology, what you were born with, right? An X chromosome, a Y chromosome, XYY. So and the reason to know these terms is because oftentimes what you hear in the media, what you hear in different places, especially from anti-trans group and anti-LGBT group, is like they try to say like, well, you're just born the way you're born, this, that, and the other, right? It's like, well, it's not that simple, right? People see themselves, we have to have the right to see themselves and be happy with the way they see themselves, right? Oftentimes as well, people will think like being gay or lesbian or bi is all about sexual attraction and having sex with somebody of the same gender or the same sex, or right, and that is actually not the case. Sexual orientation also encompasses having been, yes, sexually attracted, but also emotionally, like who do you see so long term, right? Or sharing a family or sharing a space. So in other words, it's more than just what you're born with, so, and understanding this terminology provide a more nuanced understanding of the community. And then expression is also literally the way you dress, how you wear your hair. It could also be your mannerisms, right? So I'll give you an example. I'm okay with this at this point, but I cannot tell you how many times I go through the drive-throughs and people say, yes, ma'am. So my voice, the mannerisms that I use, a lot of people will like equate them with a more feminine expression, right? So, well, my voice, but my mannerisms and the way I come across. So my expression of my gender, although yes, I have a beard, I often just wear, typical men, clothing that society would ascribe to men, right? There's other ways that I express my gender that might not be normative, right? So understanding this terminology provides some nuances to that. Something else too that is important, especially with trans and gender nonconforming or gender diverse community, is pronouns, right? So binary pronouns are, for example, he and she, he, she, he, his, her, hers, right? However, many folks, and we're learning even more, choose to use or they see themselves not just one thing or the other, right? In non-binary terms, right? So for example, using the singular they, there'd be other combinations of like zer, zim that are more, inclusive. Often when you hear folks who are non-binary, they use the term they and them. There's also folks whose gender, their perception of their gender changes. It could change from day to day, or how they choose to express their gender. It changes from day to day. So they might use different pronouns on different days. So I've worked with some, with folks who today them see themselves, what is congruent for them today is to use that pronoun him, and maybe tomorrow is her, and maybe the next day is them, right? So the best approach is often to ask folks what are their pronouns, right? And by asking folks, actually naming your own pronouns, it demystifies and kind of creates solidarity with gender norm conforming folks, right? Or gender diverse folks. So if you noticed in my Zoom, I have my pronouns right next to my name, right? And this is a practice that I would, especially under this pandemic, under the fact that they're relying so much more on technical world, on technology and Zoom, is to put your pronouns right next to your name, for people to know what is your what to use to refer to in talking to you that day. Um, yeah. So I have some questions here for you all to take like a minute or two to reflect on, and maybe write down some ideas or put them into chat if you are comfortable with that. Um, um, so I'm wondering, so when was the first time, especially as clinician, this is my understanding that most of you are like clinician or practitioners. So what was the first time you can remember learning that not all people are heterosexual, that some people, that some folks are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer, think of queer of that umbrella term that we talked about, or that some folks identify as transgender or, queer, non-binary, right? And how does your understanding of LGBTQ people change or has evolved over time? So if you can take a minute or two to, even if you don't want to share, to just kind of reflect and think about that, I think that'll be great. And feel free to also put in the chat. Oops. Again, if you feel comfortable put in the chat, and it's not, I don't know. I see some, oh, I see the chat here. All right. So I see here in junior high, let's see, Jack Tripper. My mom mentioned third grade that my soccer coach lived in the middle school principal. Okay. Yeah, so those narratives and those stories that we hear, absolutely, yeah. In college, much later about trans folks, yeah. Crystal character and Soap too. On the Dynasty, Adam. The bisexual wasn't on, okay. We're still learning much more later about bisexuality, yeah. Rumors about two female teachers. Using the word queer in a negative way, yeah, absolutely pejorative way, yeah. Yeah. Thank you all for sharing this. Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. Different faces of society. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing this. I appreciate it. Um, yeah, and I think, and honestly, I think my um, best friends being bullied, yeah, in school. Yeah, I think one of the reasons, honestly, why I shared this question with you is because I think, of course, I don't know all of your identity of all the folks in this call, but often LGBT folks, when they're asked this question, or they often get the question from like, oh, when did you know you were fill the blank, right? And it's something as a person, for myself, identifies as cisgender, gay, queer, Latinx man, right? Like it's probably differently, but true to some degree for most gender sexual minority folks, is that we know this answer really well. Like we've been asked this question so many times of like, when do you know you were this or that, right? But usually heterosexual folks or normative folks or heterosexual are never asked that question, and therefore you never have to think about it. So it's part of having that privilege of being of that normative identity, following those normative identity. It's not having to ever think about it, right? Because you don't have to, because it is a given, right? Like nobody comes out as heterosexual, nobody comes out as cisgender, because society has taught us that is the norm, and therefore you don't have to. Other folks do, but you don't if you're heterosexual and cisgender, right? So, especially as clinician, I think this is that awareness piece is really important. So, thank you all for sharing. Appreciate that. Um, yeah. Um, yeah. So, why do these impressions? So why is it that impressions matter, right? About when we learn these things, I think early experiences, some of those experiences you've shared, um, form schemas for us about people around us, right? Positive and negative perceptions of folks, right? So when you hear about the term bisexual, for example, might even if it was in a positive way, in a negative way, it might create different ways for you to interact and see just folks, right, from different identities. And so I'll briefly go over because I really want to get to the intersectionality part. So coming out, you probably have heard this term, multiple times. So coming out is, it's a process by which someone accepts and identifies with their gender and or sexual orientation. It is a lifelong process. A lot of folks think that you come out one time and that's it, and that's not the case. There's folks who are not out in their jobs, right? Especially most states do not have protection for LGBT folks. So a lot of folks are not out in their jobs, but they might be out to their family and their friends, or vice versa, right? Bring out to their family, their friends, and not their family, right? But not even that, you know, like sometimes so I am married and I'm married to cis gay men. Some look at wedding ring, or they make comments like, oh, you're married, and then the next comment is like, your wife something rather. So do I choose to say something at that time? It's a say, do I have time? Do I want to get into it? Do I know this person? So coming out is like a lifelong process, right? It depends on many things. It might be dangerous, like it says here, unhealthy and unhelpful for someone to come out to someone else, right? So a lot of times LGBT folks, and this is true for other minorities as well, other folks in minoritized identities, they do this like scan of the room, almost like to know who is safe, who's not safe, or is this situation safe, right? So and all of that might play a role in coming out or not. These are some like kind of general stuff that we have found through research. So LGBT people are coming out at a much younger age, right? LGBT folks, especially youth, are increased risk for homelessness, especially youth. Like if you look at the percentage of homeless youth and those that identify as LGBT is like significantly higher, dropping out of school, being victims of abuse, mental health issues, and to clarify, mental health issues not related to their identity, but because they live in a world, in a society in where they have to constantly explain the identity, it is stigmatized, all of those systemic barriers. So for example, so sexuality is not an issue, and I have this conversation with a lot of folks, especially in research, like race is not the problem, sexuality is not a problem, racism is, homophobia is, those things aren't the problem, people's identity are not a problem, right? So substance abuse, a lot of it, that is to cope, negative ways of coping, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, especially for trans folks. I mean, the disparity, it is huge. These are just some, in my personal research, I do a lot of research, a lot of my research is with families, especially with Latinx folks who are in a parental role. What we know from families, that family is really important for LGBT folks, especially the younger LGBT folks. So positive responses from families have been connected to emotional adjustment, positive identity, including internalized identity, higher self-esteem, better mental health outcomes all around, anxiety, depression, general health, also physical health as well. And we know the relationship between mental health and physical health. And negative responses have been connected to substance abuse, sexual risk-taking behaviors, for example, like not using condoms or having multiple partners without being cautious, increased fear of disclosure, because, well, if you're rejected by your family, especially somebody in a parental role, and they reject you, why would you disclose to anybody else? These folks who are supposed to care for you and support you do not. So why would you take the risk, right? So it makes sense. And internalized stigma, as I was saying earlier, and their self-view and self-perception of who you are as a trans person, bi person, gay person, queer person. And this, we won't go through this, but a lot of these things that we're talking about, you see these disparities at different levels, right? At the public policy level, right? So an example that would be marriage equality, right? So there have been studies that have been done after marriage equality passed in 2015 with younger folk, with young LGBT folks, and they have been able to find some correlations between this change in policy or of law and decreased suicidal ideation, right? So there's something to say about knowing that the law sees you or protects you to some degree, right? Or both, right? At the community level, some studies with Latinx trans individuals and in the community and acceptance by the community, and specifically in their immediate community, like their neighborhood, is really important at the organization level, and your job, at the interpersonal level, your relationship with people, and then also the individual level, like more those internalized concerns. All right, so intersectionality, and this is probably a term that is a very widely used term. A lot of folks use it. A lot of people throw it around, like intersectionality. And the reason why intersectionality is important, and I really wanted to bring into this presentation about LGBTs, because a lot of time LGBT folks are not just LGBT. They also have other identities. They have a disability. They are a person of color. They are, they are international folks. They have different lived experiences, right? So I think we're at a better place, especially with research and practice, in realizing that, like, people are multidimensional, right? People who are not just LGBT, right? there are other layers to who they are, right? So I don't know if you can, I'll give you a minute or two to kind of look at this, at these questions. I'll give you 1 minute. I know we don't have a lot more time. I want to get to some questions and answer, but like, if you can look at these questions and kind of reflect this for yourself, like some part of your identity that are most aware or on a daily basis, you know, part of your identity least aware of on a daily basis and what that means for you. So you can just take a minute to kind of feel free to share whatever you would like on the chat. So and if not, that's okay too. You can take a minute, that'd be great. So I think therapist, okay. The most privileged identity is white, cisgender, heterosexual, okay. Uplifted the term. Yes, it was, yes, and that is coming in the next slide. Absolutely, it was coined by a Black woman to explain, to give light to the experiences of being a Black and a woman. Absolutely, yes, by Kimberly Crenshaw, a law scholar. Absolutely. Change over time, age. Yep. Thank you all. Thank you for sharing that. This is like those identities that are more, that you think about often, those privileged identities, right? So defining intersectionality, this definition comes from the Center for Intersectionality Studies. Yeah, so, and this is just one definition, of course, promotes an understanding of human beings as shaped by the interaction of different social locations, race, ethnicity, indigenous, gender, class, sexuality, geography, age, disability, and many things that are probably not here. The intersection occur within a context of connected systems of structures and power, laws, policies, as we saw, media, political structure, through such processes in the interdependent forms of privilege and oppression shaped by colonialism, imperialism, racism, homophobia, patriarchy, ableism. All of these are created, right? And I think something important too about intersectionality is the fact that, like, like, you're not 50% something and 50% something else, or 20% this and 30% that. Like, you're always all of those pieces, right? They all intersect with each other, right? So why is it important? Because as we were saying earlier, your clients are more than just have multiple forms of experiences. And yes, as somebody mentioned in the chat, so the term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a legal scholar, to really provide provide a language to talk about the experiences of Black women that she was seeing. And of course, the term has been used since then to explain the experience of multiple forms of oppression, of privilege and oppression, right? Yep. So this is just, I don't know if it's still here or not, but like, I have found when I do this training sometimes with like undergrad students or not, or with different folks actually, I've done some different training, like middle school, some with professionals and whatnot. I'll find this cartoon to maybe highlight, the experiences of intersectionality. And oops. So this is Bob, and Bob is a stripy blue triangle, and he should be proud. Sadly, some people do not like Bob. Bob faces oppression for being a triangle and for having stripes. God hates, people protesting here in the bottom. So luckily there are liberation groups, but they aren't intersectional. So they look like either triangles or they look like stripes, right? They don't talk about each other. In fact, they compete with each other. So Bob can't work out where to go. Am I more oppressed as a triangle or more oppressed because I have stripes, so Bob wishes that the triangle and stripe could work together, and yes, they usually come together and they work together, right? So intersectionality is the belief that oppression are interlinked and cannot be solved alone, right? So if we're just looking at one aspect of someone's identity and their struggle, and we're not paying attention to the other, we do miss a lot of stuff, right? So yeah. This is kind of like another form of representation, like visual of intersectionality. All these things come together. So why do you think it matters to think of like, I kind of mentioned already, like I said, why I think it's important to look into at intersectionality, working with LGBT client, like what are some of the benefits? And I see that I misspelled benefits right there, of looking at intersectionality. So what does it matter? Why do you think it matters in your practice and when working with working with clients? Feel free to put in the chat. Some of the benefits: person feeling truly known, okay, not having to negotiate aspects, okay, to invite their whole self to the room. People feel seen, absolutely. Yeah. Yep, not seeing the person as a full person if you don't acknowledge those identities, absolutely. Yeah. Helping people accept their full selves, different aspects of the person's identity, more salient to specific person's identity, specific situations, absolutely, yes, that could, yep. Internalized oppression, yep. Missing critical issues, importance to the client, absolutely, thank you. Thank you all for sharing those. Yeah. So I had a video prepared for you to kind of that kind of highlights these pieces. For time's sake, I'm not going to play it, but I am happy to send Linda and the folks, Patrick, this link on some other resources as well. This is again after other ways in which all of this intersectionality kind of interact with each other. People, just you'll kind of put in the chat as well. People belong to more than one marginalized group and can face overlapping forms of prejudice. Experience violence motivated by multiple forms of oppression, racism, homophobia, right? And so we can see here, this is just one example of what we're talking about. I'm gonna read this. I'm a trans woman and I live at the intersection of multiple oppressions, racism, misogyny, transphobia. I'm proud I have a proportionally high chance of being murdered. And I am 25 times more likely to have attempted suicide than the general US population. I'm a survivor. I'm 5 times more likely to have experienced homelessness than the general US population. I'm beautiful. I'm 40 times more likely to be HIV positive than the general US population. I'm a child of God. So kind of like poem is, to kind of highlight the intersection specifically of racism, misogyny, transphobia. So yeah. So what can you do? So what do you, I guess I'll post this question and I'll give you a minute to like maybe type something in the chat. So what do you feel like you can do? Knowing this intersectional lens, what you can do as a therapist, as a clinician, as a practitioner. Trauma-informed DBT for transgender teens, who have experienced, that sounds like a super dope group. Sounds amazing. Yeah. In relation to identity. Thank you, Jack, for sharing that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So these are just some ideas as you're typing in the chat. Here are just, some ideas, and they come from not necessarily, they come from that intersectionality, different website. And I see here in the chat, model acceptance for others. Yeah, be teachable, honor person's identity, be aware of risk. Yep. So here are some pieces. Using a centered person approach, avoid assumptions, ask questions without value judgments, right? Being flexible, a lot of times we ask questions, but we're expecting an answer, or like we're like very shocked by the answer, increasing knowledge and understanding, making sure that our diversity training includes protected characteristics and pays attention to intersectionality, right? Increase, accessibility, ensuring maximum levels of accessibility by following social, models of disability, right? So who is being included in your interventions? If you're consulting the literature, if you're consulting research, well, who was that study for, right? Does it really represent the person in front of you, right? Consult, collaborate, and a lot of these things like, well, wouldn't you do this with any forms of therapy? And the answer is like, honestly, yes. So a lot of times we're looking for like a perfect approach to work with LGBT clients and or most folks who have intersectional identities, and a lot of times being present in those common factors, those basic therapeutic skills that we learned, that we know are really important. Positive representations and messages. And that is a big one, number 6 over here. Especially LGBT folks and LGBT folks who share other oppressed identities, we hear a lot about suicidal ideation and the and the negative things, like how it's, yes, and a lot of times it is hard for us to see what is positive about myself, right? So capping on that, and on those narratives of positive aspects of being a Black trans woman, right? An LGBT person with disability. I think that's important, those positive aspects. And I just have here, this is a commonly used model to kind of look at intersectionality and different forms of identity, addressing model. There's just some questions that you might ask yourself or your clients, how does your family deal with these feelings, right? What are some coping strategies they use? And family might be very important, specifically, broadly speaking, for like Latinx folks and other people of color. So I think being inquisitive and culturally humble is also important. So yeah, I know I kind of rushed with the last few slides. I want to create, I know we have about 10 minutes left. I want to create space for questions or just comments on the chat. So I'm happy to come back to any slides for any clarification or anything. So any questions, comments that you might have, feel free to put them in the chat, or yeah. Yeah. And actually, I think Melissa, the thing you said for folks to write their name and then we can call them then to ask the question. That sounds great too. Yeah.
It's always so stressful who goes first.
All right, so Kelly Carter.
Hey, I guess my question is, do you have any suggestions on how to make, I forgot how you worded it a second ago, but like make your practices public, about how your acceptance public, like using acronyms, language on a website? Like, do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, there's probably multiple, right? But I think visibility and LGBT folks knowing that you're a safe person to go to, I think it's important, right? So for example, somebody might be, if you have an ad somewhere, I don't know, Psychology Today, whatever that is, right? Do you write your pronouns right next to your name, right? Things like that. Do you specifically and openly mention that you have worked with LGBTQ folks, right? When you are with a client in front of them, right? I think a lot of times there are assumptions made, right? Maybe owning your own identities, right? It is whatever those identities are for you, right? I am not, as a cisgender person, I might not, I don't know 100%, or at all what is to be a trans person, right? But affirming that, this is hopefully we can create a safe space, right? So I think the way we communicate, even website, what form, I think that is important. Something too that research points and folks tell us is like, is your practice, if your office still does look like a safe space? Sometimes putting like a rainbow sticker or like a trans signals something very different, like over, and then of course that has to be followed as well by your actions in that session, right? But I think honestly, the first step is to signal that you're a safe person. And also that awareness piece, I think is important to work with that awareness piece even before, because we could damage also people, right? We could also create, we know this, right? We can also damage folks, so doing our own awareness, doing our own reflections and thinking through those pieces. Are we ready to see an LGBT client, right? What do I need to work through, right, for those pieces as well? So I don't know if that was helpful, Kelly, but yeah.
It was, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else? And again, I think this is like a very surface area. We're just scratching the surface, but I see that Jack has a question too.
Hello, I would be curious of like your top 5 resources for working with LGBTQ teens specifically.
Teens, yeah. I will become very familiar with like lesson resources. They have like they do a lot of stuff in school, but adolescents do spend a lot of time in school, and younger folks too. They have a lot of resources. They do like climate surveys every year, and it's not in super research type of term. It's very digestible. It's very like matter of fact. You even have like visuals and things like that. So I will definitely look at lesson resources. I mean, I'm biased because I a lot of my research is with families, but there is, I'm gonna put in the chat, the Family Acceptance Project out of California. Has great resources as well. what else would I say? HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, and to be quite honest, I think the Human Rights Campaign have not done a great. I think they're undoing some of this right now, or trying to be more inclusive. The Human Rights Campaign historically has not been wonderful in providing resources or even visibility for trans folks and gender diverse folks. I think they're moving more toward that direction, but also HRC will look at the resources that they have at HRC.
Can you spell Glasson for me?
Oh, Glaston, gay. It used to be the gay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. My pleasure.
I think we have time for one more question if anyone has anything else. So Roberto will send the resources and the links to his video, and I will push that out to all the attendees. And then if there's any questions, further questions, then you can just let me know. Roberto, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
This was great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having me, and I hope that you're all well and your loved ones are well.